This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is May 15th, 2025.
I'm Sturko Lundebaum.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, the cops were called on BC's opposition, and Mark Carney has appointed his ministry. Patreon.com/Politicos. We got lots to talk about this week. Let's start here in British Columbia. We talked a little while back about this leak from the Ministry of Health and a presentation from police chiefs that was done in camera. It was confidential, and the slides leaked out suggesting significant diversion of safe supply was happening in British Columbia. Now the government wants to know who did it, or more specifically, the director of the police within the Solicitor General's office has ordered an investigation into who leaked the presentation.
Yeah, so this is being done with a provision that allows the Director of Police and Services to basically order an investigation into suspected police corruption. Now, the challenge here is that this government has talked quite a bit about how important whistleblower protection is, and even went as far as to strengthen whistleblower protections early in its tenure. And it kind of looks bad to then launch a police investigation into what is effectively a whistleblower.
So there's a meta story that we'll get to about the minister. On the investigation itself, it does seem likely that this presentation was in the hands of only a handful of people, most of whom were chiefs of police. And it somehow made its way to the BC Conservative opposition, specifically MLA Elanore Sturko, who herself is a former cop. And it drew particular attention because she announced, "Why were the police calling me?" To which the meta story kind of comes out of the Solicitor General Garry Begg going, "Well, you're a former cop. You should get that police need to investigate all lines of things when they're doing something like this, and this is all fine, isn't it?" Which didn't go over well with anyone.
Yeah, pretty much Garry Begg was the only person who thought that was a good line. And I guess the Director of Police Services, too.
Like, the Director of Police Services has a reasonable job here. I'm not going to say that they did the wrong thing. I think
there's always an element of judgment in here. And, they were within their powers to do that. I'm not sure they exercised good judgment in doing it, though.
It's very weird to do it now.
It was some of the reporting I saw suggested that this may have been initiated back in February.
Okay.
But the investigation only got made public after the police interviewed Elanore Sturko, who then made a point of saying, "Why was the police interviewing me? And hey, isn't this all a little problematic to be trying to go after a whistleblower?"
It was noted she is not a suspect. She's not presumed to be the leaker, but rather the person who got the document and just made it public. As the premier pointed out, that's the job of an opposition member, a good opposition member, because he took the smart line on here and went, yes, whistleblowers are important, and yes, they're, in his view, are better uses of police resources. I think it is an issue if police chiefs are leaking and playing politics when they have very specific roles to do. And so that's where I see some value in this investigation, because if police are trying to play into a broader public discussion rather than stick to their very specific lane, that's the thing worth investigating.
2 points on that. One is we don't know it wasn't from the Ministry of Health where those slides came from. And 2, yeah, police shouldn't be playing politics, but police also shouldn't be dishonest or furthering untruths, which is what the government was trafficking in when they were, for years, swearing up and down there was no issue with diversion of safe supply. And that turned out to be a big lie. And, in that respect, is telling the truth actually problematic?
The police leaking, if it happened this way, their own report that alleges, quote, significant diversion without actually defining what is significant is just doing politics. It's just trying to spread their version publicly, because we haven't actually established what significant means here beyond like 2 words on a slide.
I mean, when the material became public, the government didn't exactly argue the finer points of what the definition of significant is.
That's because this government hasn't been willing to stand behind safe supply.
Or they realized they were caught in a lie and there was actually real diversion going on.
No one's ever said there's zero diversion. Just that.
Well, the government was very clearly trying to paint a picture that it was not a problem.
And I don't think we proved it was a problem from the slides that got out, but people like Elanore Sturko were eager to turn it into a story. I think bringing it back to today's story rather than relitigating the release itself, Garry Begg fucked up. Real bad. Yeah.
Not only taking the very problematic position that this is in fact what the police should be doing, is tracking down the person who blew the whistle on this, but also apparently did not talk to the premier about this, because the premier had a much more reasonable position, as we kind of alluded to. And instead, you have him first defending it and then sheepishly late at night putting out I want to clarify my comments on this release.
And one of the pieces noted, I think it was Von Palmer's, that Begg was sitting beside EB in question period when EB answered Sturko about this. And then it was after question period when he gave his, the investigation's all fine. I'm totally on board with it. Let's find out who this was. And then changed his tune later after presumably a very stern talking to from David EB himself. So just really a rough 24 hours. It might not amount to much in the longer term, but I think the lesson of today's podcast will be off-the-cuff ministers are sometimes a problem.
Yeah, or pick your cabinet better. Because this is a guy who's spent most of the time as a NDP MLA in the backbenches and only got promoted to cabinet once he very, very narrowly won his seat. That was the one that came down to just 22 votes between him and the Conservatives. And you do gotta wonder if the cabinet appointment to Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General wasn't we kind of want to boost this guy's profile in the riding, because it sure looks like this is our most vulnerable seat. More than, he would actually make a good Minister of Public Safety.
I think when he was appointed, we didn't question it much, because here's a, prominent ex-cop who just narrowly won re-election. The NDP only has a handful of people like that to put in public safety. Mike Farnworth, they wanted to move clearly to infrastructure, a critical file that he can probably handle pretty well. And so who do you pick, right? There's only 2 or 3, I think, former police in the BC NDP's caucus. And so they picked Garry Begg.
You don't necessarily have to go with...
You don't have to.
In fact, often in Westminster systems, there's a preference not to put the person who has deep ties to that policy area, because there's concerns they're not necessarily going to be fully objective, and they, just over a long career may have picked up some tendencies that will lean them towards one stakeholder group or another. And I'm just flipping through the last bunch of public safety ministers, and other than Mike Morris, it's mostly been a group of non-cops.
Fair enough. And maybe it's his past experience in the police force that made this investigation feel far more routine to him than something to at least tread carefully around when speaking publicly about. But here we are. Let's go from one touchy file to another for the government, as David Eby has been trying to stick handle a couple stories the past week around how are we going to fund Translink, with some initial reporting coming out suggesting maybe there's some road pricing on the table, maybe there's additional vehicle levy fees, and Eby has now definitely slammed the door shut on road pricing, because this is the party that got rid of the tolls, Scott.
Yeah, much to the Wonch's disappointment. And, this is also following a few years back when I think it was mostly Translink, but the provincial government was involved too. A big multi-year study into road pricing revealed it would generate over $1 billion a year in revenue. That can definitely patch the $300 million hole that Translink has right now. And more to the point, have a bunch of other benefits. New York City just unveiled their system within the past year after a truly insane amount of delays on that one. But it has been a wild success. Not only has congestion cut down, but a whole bunch of other indicators are real positive on that.
Literally everything is better, but at what cost? The answer is $9 to drive into Manhattan, and freedom.
Yeah, it's insane.
If you ask Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's insane they delayed this thing for years so they could write a 4,000-page environmental assessment to suggest that, having less driving would be good for the environment.
Here in BC, David Eby has said we're not looking at mobility pricing or congestion pricing, but we need ways to fund transit. And so, they have property and housing development, and possibly vehicle levies and other things that can hopefully come in the future. They recognize gas tax revenue is going to go down as more people pick up EVs. And so how do you kind of offset that if you're, shutting down one of the easiest ways to do it? Plate tax, I guess.
Yeah, it's a little disappointing they're looking at vehicle tax rather than the congestion pricing, because in addition to all the positive benefits, it really does kind of hit everybody regardless of how much they drive, rather than, targeting the people who contribute the most to congestion. When I lived in Mount Pleasant, Vancouver, I had a car that I'd had before I moved there. But, that thing did not get nearly as much driving. It did not contribute nearly as much to congestion as a lot of other cars were doing in the region. So, why would it make sense to hit that one more than the ones that are being used heavily and contributing to congestion?
I think there's a small justification in just reducing parking demand. People think they need 2 to 3 cars per household, but can probably get away with one. The problem is the vehicle levy is probably not going to be high enough to really disincentivize that, because car ownership's already a massive weight of cash around your neck every month between insurance and fuel or electricity and whatever else you need for it. So, we need to fund Translink. I hope they bring something out soon. They've done the interim bailouts, but we need that longer revenue model to come. And speaking of non-existent revenue models, the BC Green Party, I wanted to bring them up because nothing is happening in that party.
Which is weird, because you think there would be something happening given that they're currently leaderless and in theory are working towards selecting a new leader.
They had a deadline for May 31st for people to join the race, or at least apply to join the race, and be approved by the Green Light Committee. But a few days ago, they just kind of quietly extended the deadline to June 14th with no announcement. There has been no one publicly musing about running. Ryan Clayton, who's been on this podcast in the past, points out on his Substack that we'll link to, the rules do preclude potential candidates from suggesting they may run for the race without being approved. It's not an unusual clause for leadership races, as I've come to understand.
That said, it's also fairly common you will hear the names of the people who are being considered or prepping to run before there's an official green light.
Yeah, you kind of leak it out. You kind of leak it out through a third party rather than say directly. You just kind of go, I'm still weighing my options. And meanwhile, like 4 unnamed sources are saying, yeah, so-and-so is running. In this case, we know the 2 MLAs are not running. Jeremy Valeriote took over as interim leader in January, somewhat quietly. And Rob Botterill doesn't want the job. It has been reported that Andrew Weaver doesn't want the job. Not that anyone was asking, I think. So it's weird. It's the whole green movement is struggling in this country. Municipally, they didn't quite get their ass handed to them as much as ABC did, but they didn't do well when they could have. Federally, they only held on to Elizabeth May, almost held Mike Morris, but everything else collapsed. Their maritime presence that was starting to break through like 5 years ago, it's gone. It's just non-existent now. It's a bleak time if you're a Green supporter, or even just like the diversity of voices. And it's kind of weird how it happened, right? Because like the environment is still an issue people care about, or if it's not, then the Greens should be pushing it. But it's like just a lot of internal dynamics went really bad for a while. All the talented people left, and there's just a few toxic people, or like people who got roped in.
Well, yeah, I can't
hanging around still.
Yeah, I can't speak to what happened with the PEI Greens, who at one point were doing very solid there, but yeah, federally and provincially, you've kind of seen there's just been no effort to build up a party structure that can sustain itself outside of the leader, or bad leadership basically undermining the ability to build a sustainable, endurable party structure. So it's not a surprise there's a lack of people coming forward, particularly because there is no clear way to get into the legislature and actually do the job of being a party leader. There are 1 safe seat and 1 picked it up, but no guarantees a by-election would turn out the same way seat. Which, just puts a real challenge on it. Plus, like, what's the point of the Greens right now? They're hardly leading the conversation or even much of a factor in any of the discussions on any of the serious issues going on right now.
Yeah. Like, the Greens actually had a race in 2020. Candidates like Cam Brewer haven't said anything about running again. Kim Darwin, I don't know what she's been up to. Like, Brewer wrote a book on green cities recently, and you think like he'd still have some interest in this, but yeah, it's interesting. We'll keep our ear out, because maybe in a month there will be a competitive race announced, and the party is just like slow rolling all the applicants they have to run for leadership. But I am not optimistic that's the case, given the lack of rumors.
Well, not only that,
maybe just no one cares, and that's why there's no public rumors.
It's also that you wouldn't have pushed back the membership or the application deadline if you did have a bunch of people you were just trying to get through the Green Light Committee. True. Yeah, that tells me this thing's kind of a slow-rolling disaster more than a we're being strategic about this. Because also you would be trying to generate interest in it, so be making announcements or having off-the-record sources talk about, just how much interest there has been in it. And instead, you get radio silence, which is a pretty clear indication that there just is no energy there.
And every couple of weeks, the party posts something to their Instagram saying, "Hey, want to be our next leader? You could apply."
Yeah,
still.
that's also that might be the worst sign. Because serious political parties don't have to go advertising for leadership candidates. Anyway, we may have a eternal interim leader if things keep going the way they are.
Let's jump to federal politics. The big news of the week is the new cabinet has been announced by Mark Carney. He's calling it his ministry. He's introduced secretaries of state. Seems like he picked up some things from the UK that he wants to import to Canada, and whatever. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, before
I don't
2015,
really care what it's called.
Before 2015, they were ministers of state. That title,
and that's what BC has too.
Yeah, that title got done away with because if you remember, it was a really big deal that the 2015 cabinet was gender balanced, but when people started looking at just the finer points of that, they noticed that a lot of the gender balance was made up by putting women in the Minister of State roles. So they rather quickly and hastily just made everyone full ministers to avoid that uncomfortable situation.
Indeed. Carney was able, I didn't actually count, but it was announced that he went for a gender balanced cabinet of 24 full ministers and 10 additional secretaries of state. The cabinet's interesting, right? Because there's a lot of familiar faces here, despite its branding as a change cabinet. But at the same time, half of them, 13 of these cabinet ministers I read, were new to this. So it's, I don't know, a Rorschach cabinet. You can, if you want to see a Trudeau cabinet here, it's not hard. But if you want to see like a new dynamic grouping, well, some of that's there.
Yeah, the Conservatives were posting photos from the swearing-in ceremony at Rideau Hall, and the front row, you could not guess which year it was taken because it was entirely Trudeau-era cabinet ministers. Which, is the interesting thing here is, despite the changed branding on this, despite the fact that there was a very clear signal that Canadians are wanting change and that Mark Carney had done a okay-ish job presenting himself as, the serious and senior cabinet roles are pretty much all familiar faces.
Let's go through a few of them. And I think like there is value to keeping some people around, particularly some of the more competent people. Anita Anand in Foreign Affairs, Dominic LeBlanc, President of King's Privy Council and Minister responsible for Canada-US trade. Patty Hadju seems to have done pretty well. She's now in Jobs and Families. There was some initial reporting Chrystia Freeland was going to be out of cabinet, but she turned up in Transport and Internal Trade.
Which was her old portfolio.
Which was what she had just before. Yeah. Otherwise, you have like Melanie Joly is over to Industry. Apparently, she requested that because she didn't want to travel as much anymore. She wanted to be in Canada more often, which definitely will happen. Sean Fraser gets Attorney General, which led me to learn that he was briefly a lawyer for like just a couple of years in a Calgary law office, I think. Stephen Guilbeault gets to keep Canadian identity and culture, but that's not going to stop him from talking about pipelines. And David McGuinty in National Defense.
Yeah, so there's several strong performers that have returned. Like I said, Nita Anand is generally considered to be one of the very solid people who deliver results. Dominic LeBlanc, similarly. That said, there are definitely some dead weight and or people that are just way too Trudeau in their mannerisms, approach to politics and everything that would not have hurt Mark Carney to get rid of. Two that jump out at me here are Melanie Joly and Stephen Guilbeault. Joly would be a little difficult just because she's such a prominent person in Quebec. But, would anything have been lost by jettisoning Guilbeault on this? They gave him Canadian Identity and Culture, which is a portfolio he's had before, but, he definitely rubs a lot of people the wrong way. And, the parts of the country that did not like being lectured about pipelines and oil production by a activist from Montreal, I don't think are going to like being lectured at about what Canadian identity is by the same activist from Montreal. Nor did he do a great job last time he had the portfolio. He did. He was the one that spearheaded some of the Broadcasting Act reforms, and if you remember those ones, that was the thing that blew up into this whole thing about whether or not the very badly worded bill was actually going to basically give the CRTC the ability to regulate pretty much anyone who posted on social media.
I wonder if Guilbeault is more popular in Quebec than we understand, and maybe he has that kind of thing. Like, fundamentally, with identity and culture, it's heritage, Canadian heritage, just renamed. I think his focus for this term is going to be reforming and funding CBC. And that's something that matters a lot in Quebec. And most Canadians are warm enough too. Like, except for like the diehard conservative partisans who wanted to fund it. As long as he can just basically follow the script, which was fine, that they developed right before the election, can largely keep his head down there. Of course he hasn't, because someone already asked him about pipelines, and he just said, as far as I know, companies don't want to build east-west pipelines, which is a true thing, but it's the kind of thing that triggers conservatives, especially in Alberta.
Yeah, he also did significantly underestimate the current usage of Trans Mountain, which quite a few people pointed out was not entirely accurate, and not a great sign for the ministry that is in theory going to be responsible for dealing with misinformation. But yeah, overall, my first look at this ministry was, they've done a decent job bringing in some fresh faces, and I don't think they got the headline they wanted to get out of it of being a changed cabinet, but they probably aren't going to get saddled with the meet the new team, same as the old team. But, the more you look into it, the more it does kind of seem that way. Among the new people coming in, most of them got put into fairly senior roles. There's only kind of two that I think qualify as in any way prominent. That would be Tim Hodgson in Energy and Natural Resources. He's from the GTA, which, could potentially cause some challenges, but also has a bunch of industry experience, and that seems to have kept the concerns around that to a minimum. And then there's everyone's favorite former mayor of Vancouver, Gregor Robertson, in Housing and Infrastructure, and he's had a week.
Yeah, I'll come back to Gregor in a second. Hodgson's interesting because he was at the Bank of Canada at the same time as Mark Carney, as a special advisor to Mark Carney. He actually worked with Carney at Goldman Sachs as well. And so they have a history. So I suspect Carney knows him well and presumably trusts him. Speaking of Carney's friends, he also put Evan Solomon into cabinet, but we'll come back to that because so much to say about Evan Solomon. But Gregor Robertson in housing. It's an interesting choice. I was sympathetic to it at first because Robertson's got a mixed record, to say the least, about his time as Vancouver mayor, and everyone's got strong opinions about that. But what we need for housing and infrastructure minister is someone who understands how cities work and can work with them to get the supply and the new housing that we want and need done. And from that point of view, kind of makes sense. And then someone put a microphone in his face and said, so should housing prices go down? Which is kind of what everyone who doesn't already own a house wants, obviously. And he says, no, we'll just build lots more affordable housing. And everyone went, what?
Yeah, that's not how this works.
You can't have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, you can't have a situation where it's cheap to buy, but expensive to sell on this. None of this makes any sense. You're either in a situation where you're basically going to create like a two-tier society where anyone who has a home is set, they're great, and everyone else is going to be stuck renting from the government as the best case scenario in that.
And like maybe you can do some co-op housing and rent to own schemes and a few things like that to try to get people in through other methods, but nothing they've talked about is ambitious enough to make that realizable. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and that wasn't even the first time he was in front of a microphone on this. Around the same time, I think it was a CBC interview, got questioned on, are you the best person for this, given your record, and basically spent the entire time on that interview and in subsequent comments more or less trying to rehabilitate his image as the mayor of Vancouver, which is a very backwards-looking approach for someone who needs to be forward-looking in how you get this done. And everything he said so far is basically we didn't do anything wrong. I have a great record on housing, and we're just gonna keep doing all of that, which, like you said, the record's pretty mixed on that. Some capital A affordable housing came online during his time, but housing overall got way more expensive. He significantly raised taxes on new homes, which is the opposite of what was in the Liberal platform on that. And yeah, this fundamentally is a ministry that has a big task ahead of it. And right now, the minister seems far more concerned about using the platform that gives him to fight legacy questions than to actually deliver on making all housing, not just the housing the government has a direct hand in, more affordable. And that's a problem. I've gone from being, skeptical but willing to entertain the possibility to pretty negative on Dreger Robertson over the past 2 days, just based on the comments here. And you hinted at about that this is a ministry that's going to need to deal with a lot of municipalities, and it would be good to have someone who understands the challenges there. The problem I'm seeing from his comments on it is he has a pretty bad case of terminal municipal politician brain in how he is talking about and approaching these issues. It's not this is how we unlock stuff. It's these are all the constraints, and this is, the politics of housing from 15 years ago when he was starting out as mayor, and hasn't really updated how he thinks or talks about it since.
I do want to avoid being too harsh on him. Like, I think he does need to do better. I think the criticism is valid. Like, it has been 24 hours or like 48 hours, right? It's been like 2 days since cabinet was announced. And so, like, what is he focused on? I don't know, finding his office and the toilets. Like, he got a couple interviews and he flubbed them. But I don't know that he actually is so much concerned about his reputation unless we see that keep coming back. Like, it was one interview.
Well, he also, last night at like 10 p.m. or something, jumped on Twitter to do a series of posts trying to defend his comments from earlier on all of this. So this is
a sign, like, Carney needs to actually start talking to his ministers and like get them to work. They're too bored, or at least Gregor is. Give them something to do. tell him what his job actually is,
Well,
and we'll find out if he can do it.
The great thing
but
about
in the meantime, it's not working for him.
The great thing about having just been elected in a national election is you have this big book of policies that the party put together for what it was going to do when it got into government. So, he could start going through that and start figuring out how he's going to execute on some of those things. But so far, he's more or less seemed to be taking the position that, the things he did as mayor were the right things, and that the parts where they contradict the policy plan that they ran on aren't really a big concern to him, which is not a great sign for things to come.
So that's one of our BC MPs in cabinet. I'll mention the other is Jill McKnight from Delta, who's in Veterans Affairs, and I don't have any thoughts about her because I don't know anything about her other than she represents Delta. But let's talk about Evan Solomon in the Ministry of Artificial Intelligence and Digital Innovation. Incredible choices here all around.
I actually don't hate...
Remind us who Evan Solomon is.
Yeah, so Evan Solomon, former CBC host and art dealer. Famously got let go from the CBC after it was revealed he was using his position as a CBC host to gain contacts for then to later sell art to. Hilariously, in a full circle moment, the person at the center of the case that ended up coming into national headlines is now the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, which is just an amazing factoid on all of this. But yeah, not someone with...
So he'll be selling NFTs now. I'm stealing that joke from our Slack, but it's a good one.
Yeah. Anyway, not a person with a deep technical background or has shown much interest in the field of AI. I actually don't hate the idea of, this is a serious technology that's coming along. It's going to have a lot of implications in a lot of different fields. It has potential in subsequent development of the technology to have some really profound implications on the economy and society. We should be pretty seriously looking at this on a range of aspects on it. But is Evan Solomon the person to do it?
No, he is not. Well, maybe he is. We'll find out. I don't disagree that it's important and merits attention from the government. Digital innovation is definitely something that is important. It feels like if something had to be a Secretary of State, though, this should be there, and maybe like labor or seniors, things that have been full ministries in most governments.
Procurement, for that matter.
Shouldn't have been relegated. Procurement, defense procurement, I can see the importance of it right now. I get why defense procurement is a Secretary of State. That goes to Stephen Fuhr of Kelowna, another one of our BC MPs.
Well, and Ed was a procurement minister in a previous ministry.
Yeah.
Like, it has been a...
When everything was a ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, she, part of her rise to prominence was basically doing a very good job of getting their hands on a bunch of the COVID vaccines and some of the supplies needed around that.
Mm.
Anyway, it can be important.
Indeed. Yeah. So, yeah. I struggle to see why AI got such a prominence, especially when, there's a few things missing in this entire ministry and Secretaries of State. Science isn't mentioned, or even digital innovation is the thing that comes closest. But I saw some people going, where are the Tri-Council funding agencies going? And I think they're slotted under industry.
Historically, they have been.
Disappeared. Yeah, but research and development and, evolving tech, there's digital innovation, but I don't think that encompasses most of it. I think it's all just buried in industry, which definitely upset some people I saw in the science community, like Evidence for Democracy. There's no disability portfolio. Women and gender equality was brought back as a ministry and given to Reshi Valdez, which was definitely cheered on by many of the people who were concerned by the, small cabinet Carney announced prior to the election that lasted all of 5 minutes. And so there's just some interesting choices in the titles he went for. Like we have Internal Trade for Chrystia Freeland, and Dominic LeBlanc got Minister of the One Canadian Economy, among his many other titles. So I guess we'll see how it all goes.
Indeed.
Just rounding it out on BC, I'll mention also Randeep Sarai from Surrey Centre was named the Secretary of State of International Development, and Stephanie McLean of Esquimalt, the former Alberta NDP advisor, is the Secretary of State for Seniors. I think I saw overall regionally it's a fairly Ontario and Quebec heavy caucus.
Yeah, so I think Ontario was the only actually Ontario and Manitoba I think were the only provinces that nailed their proportion of cabinet, their proportion to the population. BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan are underrepresented, at least among the full ministers on that. Saskatchewan particularly so, because there are no MPs in cabinet, though I think they only held one seat in the province there. Quebec and the Maritimes tend to be overrepresented in this. It's also a very GTA heavy cabinet, so even within Ontario it skews very much towards Toronto.
Save on travel costs for having a secondary cabinet office in Toronto.
Yeah,
but actually really should, because flights into Toronto are much easier for everyone than Ottawa. I think I saw Dave Moscrop suggest we should move the capital around every couple of years just for fun.
That seems like an administrative headache. It wouldn't be the worst idea.
We don't need to entertain that right now.
No, definitely not. And besides, we don't need to make Toronto think it's any more important than its already overinflated sense of itself is. Interestingly,
on cabinet, there's some notable names not in there.
The two that jump out to me are Corey Hogan, who represents Calgary Confederation, the only Calgary MP, and one of two Alberta MPs, particularly with Alberta shaping up as the major national unity challenge for the foreseeable future. Quebec is thankfully quiet on that front for now. You would think you would want to have as many effective communicators in that cabinet as possible from that area, and from listening to the Strategist podcast he was on before he jumped to federal politics, he is someone who is quite capable on that front, and I think is a definite miss in terms of getting in cabinet. And it seems like a weird oversight to not kind of do more to max out the Alberta representation in here, just given the broader backdrop, particularly for someone who, seems like he would probably be a fairly strong performer, or at least have the potential to be, rather than some of the names we've mentioned to date on that. And then in terms of people who got cut from it, the one that I think everyone's been talking about is Nate Erskine-Smith, who had the housing ministry before and is now relegated to the backbenches. Here's a relatively late addition to the Trudeau cabinets, only getting the promotion, I think, within the last year on that. But in terms of someone who...
December 20th.
Yeah, so very recently. But in terms of someone who, gets housing in a way that the current housing minister seems incapable of, he was pretty solid on that front. Whereas it seems like whereas Director for Tourism of Talk hasn't seemed to, and the housing file will probably be less of a pain in their ass right now if he'd been still in that position, or even just in cabinet. The other interesting thing, that is he was apparently asked to run again, which also just kind of feels like bad form to ask someone to run and then demote them after the election.
Yeah, you got to be Sean Fraser to come back and
or
be rewarded with Attorney General. Yeah, after you've said you're resigning. You know what it is about Erskine Smith and Hogan is they both had podcasts. And I feel like Carney's just doesn't like podcasters. He kept the podcasters out of cabinet. Maybe it's a personal grudge.
I don't know. He seemed to have no problem going on a bunch of U.S. podcasts.
Oh, he's happy going on them. He doesn't respect the people who run them to run the country. I don't know. Erskine Smith did say he's relaunching the Uncommons podcast he does. Erskine Smith's really interesting, right? Because he's well known as like the maverick or least predictable MP in the Liberal caucus, the one most likely to vote against or vote out of step with his party.
Yeah, which basically means
and bring
1 in 1,000 votes.
More radical ideas, which but they tend to be prominent ones. Things around, I think he voted with the NDP on some of the first pharmacare motions. He's brought a lot of drug policy reforms. He was pretty outspoken advocate around electoral reform as well, I think. Lots of different issues he's brought up and cared about over time. And I wonder if that's part of why I think he wasn't in cabinet prior, is he preferred that independence as well. And it was actually kind of a surprise, I think, to a lot of people that he got in December. And perhaps Carney just doesn't trust that wild card nature or something. And I don't know for serious what the issue with Hogan was. And it may have even been with both of these guys. Like, we just don't need 2 more white guys. I mean, he tried to go for gender balance, and
maybe, but
that may have been it.
I don't know. Like, Melanie Joly, I guess, prominent, but like she also kind of didn't do a great job as Minister of Foreign Affairs. Like, a demotion would not have been out of the question on that, and you can bring in someone who'd be quite potentially a solid performer. Like, that probably would have been on net a better thing.
The other big demotions were Bill Blair, Jonathan Wilkinson, and Jeanette Petipus Taylor, who are all just completely out of cabinet. Like, it's high chance lots of these people get parliamentary secretary roles to still get something to do, or maybe some good committee work, and then they can find their way to a future larger cabinet. But, Carney wanted to go for a smaller cabinet than Trudeau. He picked 34 names as opposed to Trudeau's, I think, was getting up to closer to 40. So, I don't know. It's an interesting group, and we'll see how they start to perform in the coming weeks as Parliament returns in, a couple weeks still? Week and a half. One thing they won't be doing when they return is tabling a budget, though. Yeah,
this is weird because they'd said earlier they were going to put out a budget around Canada Day, I believe, and that's just not happening for some reason.
It's really hard, to be fair. Like, budgets aren't simple documents, so I get that.
Although,
not trying to defend it, I think it's still, like, they were the government before, could have been working on it for a while now.
Yeah, when Harper got elected the first time, I believe they managed to get a budget together in 90 days. Surely the same party can manage to put a budget together in about the same amount of time.
We've developed, and this is largely Trudeau's fault, this bad habit since, and it more started with COVID, when 2020 was a bad year to be doing a budget, right? Everyone gets that. But ever since then, we've not had a very good, consistent budgeting process in this country. We've gotten a few budgets, obviously, but we've just missed a few. And that's not good for democracy in any way. It's hard for the opposition to hold the government to account. It's hard for financial markets to have a sense of where the country is going. Supposedly, we're getting a fiscal update in the fall because we need something. And we'll get probably a supply bill. And apparently, we're getting our tax cut right away because that's the priority.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is its whole other thing. For someone who was apparently pretty anti-Trump, he sure seems to like to adopt the mannerisms of Trump. Because, Mark Carney did this whole showy signing of the TATSTOT thing, which is just not how the system works at all. But nevertheless, he seems to have adopted the let's do a showy signing thing that will for sure require actual legislation to enact. This just bugs me so.
I mean, if we're saying that's like Trump, then like 90% of the stuff Polyev does is like Trump.
I don't think that's the case, but like bullshit signings of stuff is very Trumpy on this in a way that Carney, who has worked in senior government positions, would know is not how the system works on this. And it's disappointing to see this become a regular feature, because this was also done with the carbon tats.
I think he just likes a good press conference with some kind of visual.
But it's not how...
Maybe he does get marketing.
It's not how it actually works, though. Like, these are meaningless things being signed. Particularly this one.
The carbon tax was presumably a little bit more substantive because he did sign the order in council to set it to 0. So that was something. I don't know exactly what he was signing, but there is a process to do tax code changes that is outside the legislative process of it. It's still within the House of Commons in terms of like the party submitting a Ways and Means motion that allows the CRA to start to move before a budget or budget bill is even brought forward. So he was signing something real, but like, yeah, I don't know. I don't care that much. I get what he's doing. Like, of all the offensive things Trump does, his showmanship is lower on my priority list than, I don't know, the like overt racism and bringing like white South Afrikaners over as the only refugees and the deportations to concentration camps. Those are all the things that we don't need to import here.
Yeah, I think we just try to avoid importing American politics, period, on this. Well, that should not be too much to ask.
Sure. Conservatives can drop the meaningless slogans then as well. Finally, the election continues to be uncertain in what the result is. Elections Canada has said the Terrebonne vote is final, but there was a quite impressive story following the judicial recount that confirmed the Liberals won by 1 vote, with someone saying, "I tried to vote by mail, but Elections Canada put the wrong return address on my return ballot, and so it came back to me, and I wasn't able to get my ballot in to the returning office before the election because of Elections Canada's error." And she was going to vote for Bloc, which would have tied the election. And
yeah, so this all happened over the weekend and last couple of days. Last we taught, this was still going into the recount on it. But yeah, since then, they did the final verification count, came out 1 vote in for the Liberals, flipped the riding. And yeah, then this person came forward on there. It's just a couple of hours ago, it's actually been reported there's 5 more that have been identified. But the long and the short of it is, this person, through no fault of their own and because of an Elections Canada error, was unable to vote. That vote would have materially affected the results of the riding, and Elections Canada's position is there isn't a process to account for ballots coming in after the deadline. So we're just going to stick with this result on there, which I get there isn't a lot of room in the legislation to make some changes on this, or say, well, shit, we need to do this differently, or something, but it's still like a not great thing when it is their fault and it is in fact changing who the elected representative for that riding is going to be. Just as a basic election confidence matter, this leads a lot to be desired, and I think Elections Canada would have been in a much stronger position if they had done a little more. This is bad. We're going to be investigating it, and we, encourage parties to challenge this in court, or we will ourselves go to court to try and get a ruling to address this or something. Our bad. You're still stuck with the wrong choice on this one. It's a bad look for the elections organization.
It's a bad look, but I think their hands are more tied than you're suggesting. Like, I think so. The right thing is happening. The Bloc Québécois has come forward and say we're going to sue for to nullify this result and have this go back to another election, right? And to do over the election because of these inconsistencies, which, given 343 races happen, we're glad to have an election where these are very fringe issues, and that probably do happen in a small number in every election. It's just very rare that it happens in a seat where there's only one vote difference, so it really matters. A few missed ballots is bad in any case, but when if the riding is won by 5,000 votes or more, it doesn't really matter, unfortunately. But in this case, like the Bloc, the loser, or the runner-up is challenging it in court to get that declaration. Because they're challenging it, Elections Canada has to do its best, not to guarantee it did its best, but to be clear and honest and to try to defend the election system. And so the other part of it there is like Elections Canada should not, and I know you're not arguing this, but they should not have the ability to nullify the result.
No, but
that creates a very bad precedent. I know you're not arguing. I just want to be very clear so that listeners understand the logic there, right? Is if Elections Canada has the ability to nullify results and they have the ability to fuck up, they could become partisan and just decide who wins, or decide they don't like who wins, and we found some mistakes. Sorry, you don't get to be elected. Like, that's a bad system that neither of us is advocating for. So this is a bad situation that I think is playing out exactly how it has to, unfortunately.
Well, I don't know. Could the electoral officer for that district or the national chief electoral officer not have sought a judicial ruling on this themselves? Like, maybe there's not... I
think that's almost as bad as them nullifying it.
Is it, though? Because you are getting a neutral third party that is the same neutral third party that will ultimately weigh in on this to make a determination on this. It's not saying, we can't have this. It's this is a bad, unfortunate situation that is outside of what the election laws clearly intended in cases like this. Like, there's not actually, from what we can tell, a provision based on what the reporting is. We've not, done a deep dive on the Elections Act, but from what we can tell on the reporting, there's not a provision that lets them resolve this issue. So in that case, like, is it...
So if you go to court, you're suing for relief and for the court to try to fix something. What is Elections Canada asking for then? Are they asking for the result to be nullified? Because that's problematic. Are they asking just the court to check their work?
It would be a nullification.
That feels moot.
The nullification is
and I don't think Elections Canada should ask for that.
Well, I mean, it's clearly the
right
thing for this, and
and the opposition gets to do that. The loser gets to do that.
Yeah, but
and they should get their costs covered by the taxpayer.
But there is also a role for Elections Canada as the organization running the election to proactively ensure that not only was the law followed, but that the results were fair and accurately represent the legitimately cast ballots of the electors in that. And when that breaks down, take steps with the appropriate judicial oversight and determinations on that to resolve the situation. And we can't actually resolve the situation itself then becomes a problem and undermines confidence in the organization and elections overall. And I don't necessarily think that is resolved by having the organization run for it, have to proactively take steps to resolve it rather than the system acting to self-correct. It's that lack of self-correction that becomes the problem here. And yeah, you don't want them to be able to just whenever they feel like it, call for a nullification. But that's why going to the court would be the appropriate thing, not just a determination by the elections officer.
But our entire judicial system is set up as an adversarial system where, like, I can't think of another case where someone is basically suing themselves, right? There's no crown corporation that is like, we made a mistake. We'll go to court to double check.
You get reference cases. Right. Those aren't inherent.
Those are to deal with the constitutionality of a certain question.
Yeah, but
and only the government itself can bring those.
Yeah, but but the point of that is you do have cases before courts where there is not an adversarial thing. That is something that exists in the system. And yeah.
Like what you're kind of proposing is an ombudsperson for the elections, and maybe that could work. The thing Elections Canada is doing is Stéphane Perreault has announced that review of the ballot box that was missed in Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam is being expanded to look at special ballots generally, particularly the postal code issue in Terrebonne, but more broadly, where else did special ballots go wrong and how do we ensure things are better in the future? That's what they absolutely should be doing. And yeah, let's see how the bloc does in court. It seems pretty clear-cut that this is going to be difficult to defend. But I don't know, the Liberal Party will have to go to court as well and also say, no, this is totally fine.
Yeah, either way, there should be a by-election called here. But yeah, I just think it's pretty unfortunate that the system can't be more self-directed and more to the point that the institutions aren't able to act in a way that engenders trust by the population in their effectiveness and trustworthiness in this case. And from what we can tell, other than the postal code screw up, that's not the fault of Elections Canada here, but when Elections Canada or any election organizer is not able to proactively take steps to restore that trust, it becomes a long-term problem. But yeah, hopefully this is something that will get sorted out in a future amendment to the Elections Act, along with hopefully changing the rules around the official agenting for multiple people in the same riding, so that annoyance can also be nipped in the bud too.
Politicoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politicoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicoast. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicoast is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.